The wind outside howled against the cracked windows of the little diner, rattling the glass and making the neon sign flicker. It was late, nearly closing time, and the place smelled faintly of coffee, fried onions, and something warm and comforting simmering on the stove. The booths were empty, except for one elderly couple quietly sipping tea in the corner. Behind the counter stood Daniel Hayes, a man in his mid-30s, sleeves rolled up, apron stained with the hard-earned marks of a long day in the kitchen. He wasn't supposed to be here at this hour. He should have been at home, putting his daughter, Emily, to bed. But bills didn't pay themselves, and the diner owner had asked him to cover the late shift. Single fatherhood meant saying yes to every extra dollar, every spare shift, every chance to keep the lights on and his little girl cared for. He wiped his hands on his apron, sighed, and checked his watch. Just an hour left before closing. He started humming softly, the same lullaby he used to sing to Emily at night, when the bell above the door jingled. He looked up. A woman walked in, tall, elegant, dressed in a designer coat that was far too glamorous for this run-down part of town. She looked out of place, as if she'd stepped out of a glossy magazine and landed in a forgotten roadside diner. But what caught Daniel's attention wasn't her beauty, it was the tiny baby in her arms, red-faced, squirming, crying so loudly the sound filled every corner of the room. The woman looked desperate. Her usually flawless composure was cracked, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. She glanced around quickly, almost embarrassed to be there, and walked up to the counter. She started, her voice breaking. "Do you have anything? Anything soft? Something for her to eat?" Daniel blinked. "How old is she?" "6 months," the woman said, rocking the baby in her arms, her voice trembling. "She won't stop crying. I've tried everything. She hasn't eaten in hours. I was driving, and she broken bar. She just won't calm down. I didn't know where else to stop." Daniel's heart ached at the sight. He saw, not just a crying baby, but the face of his Emily when she was younger, sick with a fever and inconsolable in the middle of the night. He recognized the exhaustion in the woman's eyes because he had lived it. "Sit," he said softly, nodding to the nearest booth. "I'll make something." The woman hesitated, then slid into the booth, clutching her baby tightly, whispering soothing words that seemed to go unheard. Daniel stepped into the kitchen, mind racing. He didn't have baby formula, but he did have ingredients that could be made safe, warm, and gentle for a little stomach. He remembered how he used to make a special rice puree for Emily when she was small, a recipe his late mother had once made for him. It was simply rice, a touch of milk, a pinch of cinnamon for warmth, and the tiniest drizzle of honey for sweetness. As he stirred, he hummed again, that same lullaby, and for a moment he could almost see his daughter sitting at the counter, swinging her legs, watching him cook. The past and present blurred. When he finished, he carefully carried the small bowl over to the booth. "Here," he said quietly. "It's soft, easy on the stomach. Let's try." The woman looked up at him, eyes wet with gratitude she didn't know how to express. Daniel sat across from her, held out the spoon, and together they coaxed the baby to take a small bite. At first, the infant resisted, but then, miraculously, she swallowed. The crying softened. Another spoonful, then another, until the tiny girl's sobs melted into quiet hiccups and, finally, the heavy breaths of sleep. The diner was silent again, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft breathing of the sleeping baby. The woman stared at Daniel as though seeing him for the first time. Her shoulders slumped with relief, her face softened, and tears spilled down her cheeks. She quickly wiped them, embarrassed. "I don't cry," she said, almost to herself. "Not ever." Daniel tilted his head. "Looks like you do now." She gave a shaky laugh. "I'm sorry. You don't know who I am. I shouldn't even be here." "Doesn't matter who you are," Daniel said, leaning back. "You needed help. That's enough." The woman swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Victoria Lane." The name meant nothing to Daniel. He shrugged. "I'm Daniel, just a cook." But Victoria Lane wasn't just anyone. She was one of the most powerful billionaire CEOs in the country, Her face often splashed across business magazines, her name synonymous with ruthless ambition and endless wealth. Yet here, in this diner, in the quiet dark, she wasn't a billionaire. She was just a mother, grateful to a stranger for feeding her baby. They sat there for a while, the moment stretching into something fragile and human. Daniel finally stood, returned to the counter, and poured her a cup of tea. She accepted it with trembling hands. "You have a daughter?" she asked, noticing the way he spoke of children, the tenderness in his voice. "Yes," Daniel said softly. "Emily. She's 6. My whole world." Victoria smiled faintly. "You're a good father." "I try," he said, a shadow crossing his eyes. "It's not easy. But she deserves the best I can give her." Victoria watched him carefully. She was used to people treating her with fear or awe, never with honesty. Yet this man, this single dad working nights in a crumbling diner, spoke with a kind of strength she hadn't felt in years. He didn't want anything from her. He didn't even know her worth. He had simply fed her child when she couldn't. Something shifted inside her that night. Days later, Victoria couldn't get the memory out of her mind. She sat in her glass office on the top floor of a skyscraper, staring at the skyline, but all she could see was the humble diner and the man with weary eyes who had cooked with love. She thought about how she, with all her billions, had been powerless to soothe her baby, but he, with so little, had done it effortlessly. She went back. It was early evening when she walked into the diner again, this time in a more casual outfit, though she still looked like she belonged to another world. Daniel glanced up from behind the counter, surprised but polite. "You again," he said with a half smile. "Baby doing better?" "She is," Victoria said softly. "Thanks to you." He waved it off. "Any parent would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not everyone would. You didn't just feed her. You cared." "Andy, a broken bar. I can't stop thinking about it." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I think you're giving me too much credit." But she wasn't. That night had cracked something open in her. For years, Victoria had been hardened by boardrooms and battles, by the weight of building an empire. But one act of kindness had undone her walls. Over the weeks that followed, she returned again and again, sometimes with her baby, sometimes alone. She'd sit in the same booth, and Daniel would cook something simple yet extraordinary, dishes that warmed the heart as much as the stomach. She began to realize his food wasn't just food. It was love, poured into every plate, every spoonful. She learned about his struggles, how he'd lost his wife in a car accident years ago, how he worked endless shifts just to keep a roof over Emily's head. And she saw, with growing admiration, how despite the hardship, his heart never grew cold. One night, after closing, she asked him the question that had been burning in her mind. "Daniela Broken Bar, have you ever thought about what you could do if people actually saw your gift? If you had a chance beyond this diner?" He chuckled. "Chance? People like me don't get chances. We just keep our heads down, do our jobs, and pray our kids grow up okay." Victoria leaned forward, her eyes shining. "What if I gave you one?" That night was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. She helped him open a small restaurant, and nothing flashy at first, but a place where his recipes could shine. Word spread quickly. People didn't just come for the food. They came for the feeling, the warmth, the humanity that radiated from every dish. For Daniel, it was never about fame. It was about Emily, about giving her the life she deserved. For Victoria, it was about rediscovering what truly mattered: a connection, kindness, and the quiet strength of a man who had once fed her baby without asking for anything in return. Months later, as the restaurant bustled with life, Victoria sat at a table near the window, her daughter sleeping peacefully beside her. She watched Daniel in the kitchen, laughing with Emily at his side, teaching her how to stir a pot. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from exhaustion or desperation. They were from gratitude for a man who had reminded her that humanity wasn't measured in wealth or power, but in selfless acts of love. And in that little restaurant, under the warm glow of its lights, two worlds, one of unimaginable wealth and one of quiet struggle, found common ground in the simplest of truths: kindness could change everything.